We have the pleasure today to welcome Professor Deepak Lal from the University of California in Los Angeles. Professor Deepak Lal has just written a new book entitled Reviving the Invisible Hand, and he will talk about globalization and the poor for us. Professor Deepak Lal, hello.
Thank you. Well, the current period of globalization is the second time that in some senses we've had poverty going down for the first time around the world. The first was in the 19th century, when under the British Empire you really had virtually all parts of the globe being united. In that period, the role of developing countries was largely through providing raw materials. Africa, that's the first time many African countries for the first time saw growth. Why? Because a lot of new plantation crops were introduced, mainly through private enterprise. Cocoa in Ghana was a peasant crop. Some farmer brought the cocoa plant, I can't remember from where, and then it just took off. Now that ended in this First World War, and then we had virtually nearly half a century, maybe longer, of economic breakdown, the growth of illiberal states, the growth of controlled economies. Now this changed. Begins to change in the 80s. I mean, I count the two big Asian economies, China and India. China liberalized under Deng Xiaoping in the early 80s, India in late 80s. And that's the period when much of the restrictions on trade finally went. Many countries in Latin America, many countries in Africa, for the first time, actually now move away from planning of their resources to the market. And the effects of this in the poor have been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, when you think of the major parts of the world where there were the poorest people, India, China, many other parts of Asia, there now, poverty is really declining at such a fast rate that within the lifetime of one generation, I think you'll see the poverty will be the same levels as you find in many industrialized countries. Now, unfortunately, the same thing is not true of the whole of Africa. There are parts of Africa where this is the same growth process which globalization is promoted is taking place. Botswana is one. Uganda, I think, is coming up. Ghana is coming up. So there are many countries in Africa where, in fact, this growth impulse is being revived. And interestingly, the world now is seeing a three-way division of labor. In the 19th century period of globalization, much of the third world was really based, their prosperity was based on exporting primary products, with the manufacturing centers in the north, first Britain, then Europe, and then North America. Today what we see is a three-way division of labor. Okay, the old north now is really India and China, and some of the newly industrialized countries. They have lots of labor, semi-skilled or highly skilled, doesn't matter, and they now are importing huge amount of commodities from where? From the only part of the old South. So Latin America and Africa playing the same role which they did in the 19th century, except now their primary product exports are going primarily to these fast-growing emerging economies in Asia. So what about the old West, the old North? That has now become, I call it the design center. That's the head, and the body now is spread across the third world. So they are just the design center with all, so whether it's entertainment business, fashion, all that is there because this is very human capital intensive. So R&D and all this is taking place there. And of course, one has to latch on to this because, one of the great things about late industrialization, which China and India are now achieving, is that wherever the ideas are produced, once they're globalized, you can't actually put a monopoly on them. So all this research and development now is transmitted, particularly through tools like the internet, very rapidly. So we have this new diffusion of technology. Now Africa, unfortunately not taking part of this. It's got nothing to do with economics, it's got nothing to do with trade. It's largely because what you have in Africa are still predatory states which are more interested in looting the resources which they inherited rather than creating anything. I mean, just look at Zimbabwe. I used to work in Zimbabwe in the early 80s. It was the breadbasket of Africa. Look what's happened. One man and his greed and his cronies and thugs has just ruined it. And you can tell story after story like that. But on the other hand, when one thinks of some other countries in Africa which had this sort of predatory elite taking part, they've changed. Uganda is a case in point, Ghana to some extent. So there is a process of learning. So I'm hopeful that once African states, and largely their people, decide they throw the rascals out and find some way of maintaining order and seeing that the great natural wealth of Africa can be actually used to increase prosperity, as it did in the 19th century, that there's no reason why African poverty should also decline as fast as it is now in Asia.
Professor Lal, thank you.